Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the Aeldari Transports, the Wave Serpents, and the Falcon. So it's kind of a unit-focused video, but I'm not calling it a unit-focused video because I'm not going to structure it like normal unit-focused videos, and also I'm talking about two units. But nevertheless, this is probably a little bit overdue insofar as Aeldari Transports have been a foundational component to a lot of the most successful post-Codex 10th edition Eldari lists. And this is in large part because there are so many opportunities for trickery. There are at least 4 different ways that Eldari units can jump out, like move in a transport, jump out of a transport, shoot something, and then get back into the transport before your opponent's shooting phase. So not only do Aeldari Transports grant additional mobility to infantry, which transports from all factions do for their infantry, but also they provide significant additional survivability to a faction that really struggles with durability. And to be fair, Eldar are not exactly topping out the GT podiums these days. They're doing pretty poorly, actually, since the big Ynnari nerf earlier this year, but we do still occasionally see lists getting to the podium, and many of the lists that do well, although not all of them, contain at least one Wave Serpent, in part to make use of some of these tricks. So I'm going to touch on what these tricks are. I'll talk about the 4 units that you might actually put in a transport, maybe 5, probably 4. And kind of realistically 3 in terms of what people are actually competitively playing these days, which simplifies things a bit. I'll talk about the differences between the Wave Serpent and the Falcon, why the Wave Serpent is a little bit more popular, but why the Falcon is still good, and then talk about other things that you can do with these transports besides just moving infantry around. So first off, the movement shenanigans. In 10th edition, an infantry unit can get out of a transport at any time during your movement phase. If the transport has not moved, the infantry unit can get out within 3 inches and still do all of its normal things. It could move, it could shoot, it could charge, it could make an advance move. Or an infantry unit that was already in a transport when the turn started could choose to wait until the transport has already moved to get out. But if it does that, then it can't do anything but shoot after it. So it gets out within 3 inches. It can still shoot, but it's not eligible to charge. And it is actually possible to have a unit jump out of a transport and move up the board and jump another unit into the transport and then move the transport. That second unit can't then get out. But there's a lot of shenanigans, right? But the mechanics for getting into a transport are simply to finish a normal move within 3 inches of the transport. So anytime a unit finishes a, quote, normal move within 3 inches of a transport, it can jump in. And so there's various ways you can do this as an Eldari player to try to keep your infantry alive. And most of these are detachment or unit locked, so they're associated with particular stratagems or particular units. But all Eldari players, no matter what detachment they're running, have access to battle focus, the agile maneuvers, and the fade back agile maneuver lets you make a normal move with a unit that's been hit by a shooting attack of d6 plus 1 inches. And because it's labeled a normal move, as long as that move finishes entirely within 3 inches of a transport, you could jump the whole squad back in. Those of you who have played a little bit at your local club and kind of know the rules and don't play big tournaments may think that this sounds suspect. It isn't. I occasionally get messages from people being like, surely you can't do it. You totally can do it. That's why it's called a normal move. And it's absolutely accepted as totally standard in all tournament play. If you jump a unit of Fire Dragons or Dire Avengers or Warlocks or something out of a transport, and it takes some enemy fire, and you decide to use your battle focus token on fade back, you can just jump right back in the transport, even if that transport is like behind a piece of terrain. You still take whatever casualties first from the shooting, but I think you see why this is good. Now, Space Elves are so fragile that if your opponent picks a robust shooting attack, there might not be a lot of elf left to get back in the transport. But it is a pretty effective way to punish your opponent if there's a bad dice roll and you still have a lot of elves left, and that's where you want to use it, or uh, it makes chip damage sort of dangerous. Somebody who's going to shoot at your space elves with 3 or 4 sort of not terribly potent shooting attacks. Well, if they can just jump back in a transport after the first one of those, that's pretty cool. You can obviously only use that agile maneuver once, but it's still really good. Once per turn. Now, the second way to pull this trick is with the Skyborn Sanctuary stratagem, which is a stratagem both in Warhost and in Aspect Host. So in both of these detachments, there's a 1-point stratagem that lets an Ozerman unit at the end of the fight phase that is wholly within 6 inches of a transport jump into it. And 6 inches is nice too. That's further from 3 inches than 3 inches. And the typical thing to do is to do this at the end of your own fight phase. So the absolutely standard move is to park, say, a Wave Serpent in the midfield, have a unit of Fire Dragons jump out of the Wave Serpent through the wall of a building, because infantry can move through walls of buildings with the breachable ability. Have the Fire Dragons shoot some enemy tank or monster, and then for 1 point at the end of your own fight phase before your opponent's turn, have them jump back into the transport, which is out of line of sight. And because 12 elves fit in a Wave Serpent, you could have one big unit of Fire Dragons do this. This is one of the reasons you might want 10 Fire Dragons led by Fugan or Fuegan. So the entire unit can jump back into the Wave Serpent for 1 CP, even though you could split the fire of the models in the unit. Or you could have 5 Fire Dragons or 5 Fire Dragons and Fuegan jump out and shoot something and plan to do this, and 5 Howling Banshees led by an Autarch with a fusion gun and a Starglaive jump out and go run off and do Banshee stuff and only jump back in with the Fire Dragons. Although the Banshees, if you moved the Wave Serpent this turn, the Banshees aren't getting out till next turn. But that is a popular combo. Both Fire Dragons or Banshees, and Banshees are incredibly popular includes. One thing you can do with that combo that's pretty potent is you move the transport to that midpoint in the midfield, just out of line of sight of enemy units. You jump the Fire Dragons 3 inches out, like into the ruin so that they can see, but you jump the Banshees out just between the ruin and the transport, but still out of line of sight of the opponent. And because Banshees have fight first, this prevents your opponent from running through the wall of the building with her own fast infantry and engaging the transport in melee with something powerful. So you can use the Banshees to screen the transport and then still have them in position next turn to do their advanced charge thing through the terrain and be awesome. And again, that particular trick works in either a Warhost detachment or an Aspect Host detachment, and Aspect Host is definitely one of the best from a competitive perspective. Now, specifically in the Warhost detachment, in addition to Skyborn Sanctuary, you have access to Fire and Fade, which you use in your shooting phase just after an Eldari infantry unit has shot, and that unit can make a normal move of up to D6 plus 1 inches. And because it's labeled a normal move, you could use it to jump back in a transport. So remember your Wave Serpent with the 5 Fire Dragons and maybe the Phoenix Lord in there. You could also have a Warlock Conclave with 4 Warlocks and Eldred, or 4 Warlocks and a Farseer. The Destructor power on the 4 Warlocks in a situation like that, they're each putting out D6 plus 2 attacks that hit automatically because of Torrent at strength 7 with minus 1 AP. It's only 1 damage, but that's really powerful. So the ability to jump out with your Fire Dragons and totally hose and destroy some tank or monster, and jump out with your Warlocks and hose and destroy some infantry unit, and then jump both of them back in, is pretty good. Or you do it with 2 different transports. You've got 10 Fire Dragons and a Wave Serpent and 5 Warlocks and a Falcon, And generally, that's the stuff that you're going to be jumping back in with Fire and Fade or Skyborn Sanctuary. You might jump Banshees back in, but you don't usually, for the simple reason that uh, generally Banshees need to run off to fight. It is sometimes possible to do a thing where, like, say you were to move a Falcon out of line of sight in the midfield on turn one, keep your Banshees inside, and then on your next turn, the Banshees jump out 3 inches and they do their Banshee advance and charge thing, and you follow with the transport. If the Banshees wipe out the thing that they're fighting, you could then use Skyborn Sanctuary at the end of your fight phase to jump them back in if they were close enough. I have heard of people doing this. I have never actually done it in a game. Just the way things have end up panning out, generally that has not made sense for me, but it is theoretically possible. Usually, though, these tools are tools you're going to be using on Fire Dragons and occasionally Warlock Conclaves. You could also theoretically use them on Dire Avengers. Dire Avengers are struggling a little bit right now to be included. 10 Dire Avengers in the right detachment that are benefiting from the +1 to wound provided by Eldred and the additional AP provided by a Warwalker can be a powerful tool because they're putting out 44 shots that may have sustained hits, and if they're wounding on 5s, they could potentially be rerolling the wound roll if they're in a Guardian Battle Host, or if it's a small group coming out of a Falcon, they could reroll the wound roll. There are ways to make Dire Avengers not terrible. I should make a Unit Focus video about them, but they do struggle a little bit. However, if you're having them led by Ozerman, you unlock the other way to get a unit of infantry back into a transport the same turn that it got out of the transport, or at least before your opponent can threaten you. When Ozerman is leading a unit, after that unit has shot, it can make a normal move of up to 6 inches. And because it's a normal move, if it finishes within 3 inches of a transport, it can just get back in for free. So if you had Ozerman leading 5 Dire Avengers and Fuegan leading 5 Fire Dragons, and they were to both jump out of the same Wave Serpent that was out of line of sight in the midfield, the Fire Dragons could blast their target and then use Skyborn Sanctuary to jump back in, or Fire and Fade to jump back in. And Ozerman and his Dire Avengers could blast something and then use the Phoenix Lord ability to jump back in for free. The only issue with this is that Ozerman's a little bit expensive. Dire Avengers are 80, Ozerman is 135, so that ends up being a pretty expensive package at 215, and he's been nerfed. Right after the Codex came out, when I was advising people about what to start with, I thought that Ozerman was with 5 Dire Avengers, was an amazing anchor unit for pretty much any list, and he was. But then he got nerfed, and now he's still good, but he's just kind of fine. Part of the issue is that if you've got the 4 Warlocks instead, 4 Warlocks are 130 points instead of 215. They're putting out an average of 20 shots that are automatically hitting at strength 7, -1 AP, 1 damage, which ends up being about the same damage output as the 215 point squad of Dire Avengers with the Phoenix Lord if they're not also fighting in melee. And although Ozerman can get back into a transport for free, certainly in a war host with Fire and Fade and Skyborn Sanctuary, you could get back in with the Warlocks. But Ozerman and the Dire Avengers also have better range. It's a good tool. It's one that you could think about. It's not a popular tool right now, but in conjunction with other things, the additional AP from the Warwalker, the +1 to wound from Eldred, Dire Avengers can be good. Even just a unit of 10 of them in a Wave Serpent, if you have the support from other stuff, or you're using stratagems or detachment abilities. Like in a Guardian Battle Host, they can hit on 2s and reroll the wound roll with a stratagem. If they're getting AP from a nearby Warwalker, that's pretty good. But in a Guardian Battle Host, the trade-off is you need the Phoenix Lord also if you're going to get them back in the transport. But the point is, you've got a bunch of tricks. You have a bunch of tricks if you're going to include one or more transports in your list to jump some of the best units we have available, fire dragons and howling banshees, in and out of transports in creative ways. And this particular tactic has anchored a lot of Space Elf lists this year. Let's briefly consider the differences between the Falcon and the Wave Serpent. I've kind of been talking about the Falcon a bit, like I already covered this, so my bad there. But the overall basic difference is that the Wave Serpent is more durable and it has greater transport capacity, but it has less shooting and it doesn't have this cool fire support rule that makes whatever is inside of it hit a little bit harder. So Wave Serpents hold 12 elves, Falcons hold 6. Wave Serpents and Falcons have the same toughness at 9, but Wave Serpents have 13 wounds to Falcons 12. Wave Serpents have a 5-up invulnerable save to the Falcons' no invulnerable save, and Wave Serpents have the Serpent Shield, which is a war gear ability that reduces the wound roll of any weapon with greater strength than the Wave Serpent's toughness by 1. Effectively, what this means is, generally speaking, nothing wounds the Wave Serpent on better than a 4-up, except maybe a couple of strength 18 or greater weapons in the game that would wound it on a 3. But for the most part, it's a 4-up. So more elves, more durable. The Falcon, on the other hand, has like more than double the weapons loadout in terms of fire output of the Wave Serpent. The Wave Serpent gets an underslung shuriken cannon. They both get an underslung shuriken cannon. And then the Falcon gets a regular heavy weapon, and the Wave Serpent gets a twin-linked heavy weapon, which means that heavy weapon has the normal number of shots of the heavy weapon, but it rerolls the wound roll. The normal thing is to put a Bright Lance on there. So the Falcon and the Wave Serpent both have the underslung shuriken cannon, and then they usually both have a Bright Lance, but the Wave Serpent can reroll its wound roll. But the Falcon also has a Pulse Laser, which has a 48-inch range, 3 shots, hitting on 3s, strength 9, minus 2 AP, D6 damage. Not bad. But most importantly, it's fire support rule that allows infantry that jumped out of it to get wound rerolls against something that the Falcon shot can be very powerful. It doesn't do anything for fire dragons, which is probably the main reason Falcons aren't appearing on a lot of lists, because most people are using a transport for their fire dragons, and the Falcon doesn't do anything for them. But if you have Howling Banshees jumping out of a Falcon and charging the thing that the Falcon shot, getting to reroll the wounds is pretty good. If you had a Farseer with 4 Warlocks in there, hosing the target with their auto-hitting shooting with pretty high strength, like rerolling the wound rolls on that is really good. And then if you had Ozerman and Dire Avengers in there, they would benefit big time from, rerolling the wound roll. That's solid. And then the last thing that the Falcon does for you is it has Deep Strike. So you could start it in reserve and bring whatever is in there in from Deep Strike. In practice, people are not doing this because if you put Fire Dragons in there, they're out of Melta range. Because when you Deep Strike, you have to come in 9 inches away from an opponent, and you can have the unit inside jump out the same turn it came in, but the models have to come out of the transport 9 inches from an opponent. So you're out of range for the Melta ability on the Fire Dragons. Howling Banshees can't charge the turn that they do that. And those are the 2 most popular picks. And then you could have your Warlocks in range to blast something with their auto-hitting attacks, but you're only barely within range, and that means it's pretty easy for your opponent to screen you out of anything that you would really want to attack by just creating that, making sure that 9-inch bubble. A savvy player will make sure that you just can't get close enough to actually hit anything you really want to hit. Which basically leaves Ozerman and some Dire Avengers, who might be the best pick if you were doing this, but they're just too expensive for their actual fire output. Ozerman and 5 Dire Avengers and a Falcon rolls in at 345 points, which is pretty steep, even though they could jump back in for free after shooting the same turn they deep struck in. But it's not terrible. And honestly, in a Guardian Battle Host where they could potentially all hit on 2s, have sustained hits, and use a stratagem to reroll to Oh no, you wouldn't. I was thinking about it like +1. You get to reroll the wound roll for coming out of the Falcon, so you wouldn't do that. I guess this would be playable in any detachment, but if you aren't juicing the shooting output somehow, either with a detachment ability like in Guardian Battle Host or Aspect Host, or blitzing firepower in a war host, which would trigger sustained hits on a 5-up, in conjunction, any of those say in conjunction with a warwalker that would give you more AP, I think you just find it lackluster. It's pretty clear that Dire Avengers want to be a unit that works in conjunction with models like Eldrid or these other abilities, and the synergies haven't been quite powerful enough to get competitive players to try to really lean into them. But maybe you'll be the first to find a way to make it work. Nevertheless, the reason people are leaning into the Wave Serpent is because the standard way to play the transport is to move it to the midfield, put it behind terrain, have the models jump out, shoot the thing, and then use a shenanigan to get back in. Maybe your Banshees jump out and screen the transport. Maybe you leave them in the transport to jump out next turn and advance and charge. But the value of a more durable transport with greater capacity so far has seemed to be the better move. So that's why generally the Wave Serpent. Although there are some other little tricks you can pull with the Falcon. I've experimented with an aspect host lists, starting the game with a unit of dark, like you start a Falcon on the board and you have a fin of it. You start a Falcon on the board, forget about the fin. You have a Falcon on the board with Dark Reapers inside, and you have your Fire Dragons near the Falcon. So on turn 1, the Dark Reapers jump out, the Fire Dragons jump in, the Falcon moves, and it shoots something that the Dark Reapers shoot to trigger fire support. And then if your opponent tries to shoot the Falcon on her turn, you can always duck it back behind a piece of terrain with Fade Back, but it ends up just being too finicky. Eldari struggle with durability more than they do with damage output. So the additional durability provided by the Wave Serpent tends to fill our needs better than the additional damage output provided by the Falcon. So generally, I think the way you want to play this is set it up so that you can, on first turn, you can get the transport to the place that it needs to be in the midfield to take advantage of, so that whatever's inside of it can take advantage of that positioning and stay safe and out of line of sight, and that's the move. Okay, lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the other things that these transports can do for you. Because one of the things that has surprised me since the Codex dropped in 10th edition is that I don't jump in and out of transports with my units nearly as much as I thought I would. I definitely have games where my Fire Dragons get in and out multiple times. But sometimes, for a variety of reasons, it just doesn't go that way. And if that's the case, there's a lot of other stuff you can do with those transports. For one thing, they provide you with, by elf standards, reasonably durable unit to hold an objective that's kind of out in the open. Not in the early game, because in the early game, your opponent will just blow the transport away. One of the slight problems that our transports face, you really can't put them, you can't totally expose them, because we're currently not running a lot of hard targets. Like, people are not running the Avatar of Cain. We're not, for the most part, running Wraith Knights or other tanks. Sometimes there's a Wraith Lord in lists. Sometimes there are Warwalkers. But if the only thing that your opponent can see anywhere on the board that is a magnet for heavy weapons is a Wave Serpent or a Falcon, you better believe it's not going to be hard to blow up that thing. And blowing up that thing is not going to be taking firepower away from other targets. So generally speaking, the transports need to kind of stay out of line of sight. They're a way of quickly getting infantry to the position that they need to be in. But then in the later game, when your opponent's lost a bunch of models and she doesn't have the tools to blow up a hard target easily, you can use the transport to take an objective out in the open, which is something that Eldari struggle with, especially on a flank that's like not exposed to your opponent's entire army. And maybe if you do have something like a Wraith Lord, also having a transport uh, can create some target diversity and additional durability for objective control in the mid to late game. So that's one thing. Another thing that the transports can do for you is, in conjunction with other units, provide some long-range heavy weapons fire. I've mentioned in some other videos, something that Eldari struggle with is eliminating hard targets at range. We do pretty well with our fire dragons and some of our other tools, totally blowing up hard targets that our opponent has moved into the midfield or Isha help our opponent has tried to move into our backfield. That's a real mistake against Eldari. But when there's something in your opponent's deployment zone that you really need to blow up, that's a hard target, that can be a little challenging. And so having additional long-range fire support can be helpful. But I think the most important additional task that the transports can perform for us, in addition to seizing objectives, is to move block or be essentially a distraction Carnifex. So if your opponent, say on turn 2, is trying to move down the field with a dreadnought or a tank, if you can make an advance move with your Wave Serpent and turn it sideways so that that tank or dreadnought or whatever it is can't fit through terrain to get where it needs to go, it can only move like 2 or 3 inches, you can maybe keep it out of the game for a whole nother turn, especially if that transport is also helping you score a secondary or something. Sometimes it's worth sacrificing it just to move block the crap out of a portion of the field. It's especially good with move blocking to look for non-flying big stuff your opponent has, tanks and monsters that needs to maneuver between terrain pieces, and ask yourself, if I turn this tank sideways and put it between those terrain pieces, can my opponent get through? Maybe not. It's a little expensive. A unit of Shroud Runners doing this is 80 points. 125 points is kind of a lot, but it is sometimes worth it, especially if you think you can survive like that for a couple turns, or you're also picking up some victory points with it. Oh, and they can also help with secondaries when you need to be in multiple quadrants of the board or whatever. So be creative with your transport. Once you don't need it to move troops anymore, you sort of think of it as a disposable blocking and scoring piece. Oh, and don't forget about Star Engines. It's a battle-focused agile maneuver that can only be used on vehicles. And until the end phase, you add d6 plus 1 to the move characteristic of models in that unit, but it's not an advanced move. So you could move your Wave Serpent full of Fire Dragons 14 plus d6 plus 1 and still have the Fire Dragons jump out 3 inches and shoot. Or with your Falcon with the Warlock Conclave and the Farseer with their limited range that's going to jump back into the Falcon with Skyborn Sanctuary or whatever. That's a powerful tool, especially in a war host where you have an additional battle focus token. It's really good. So my advice to you, if you're building an Eldari collection and you don't have a Wave Serpent kit / Falcon kit, because it's the same kit that can be built as either a Wave Serpent or a Falcon, my advice to you is to buy one. Eldari rely on speed and maneuverability to win games. They're fragile. The tanks both increase the speed and maneuverability of our infantry and also help address the durability issues. They're thematic for literally any detachment. Although in the Guardian Battle Host, you generally don't find yourself putting Guardians in these things, because currently what makes Guardian squads really powerful is the ability to attach a bunch of Warlocks to them, at which point, and maybe a support weapon, at which point there are too many models in the squad for them to fit in any transport. So we're not currently really putting Guardians in them. And then as far as Wraith constructs, there might be an argument for Wraiths with D-Scythes and a Wave Serpent and a Wraith host. I mean, I guess you could do it in any detachment, because the crappy shooting on the Wraiths that aren't, when they're not near a Psyker, doesn't affect weapons that hit automatically. But it just ends up being a really expensive tool to put 5 super expensive heavy infantry into a transport. It rolls in around 400 points, I think. I'm sorry, around 300 points. But that's a lot. That's a lot. And there's really no longer a reason to put Scorpions in transport. So really, you're really only looking at 3 or 4 units that you might want to be moving around in this way. Maybe Reapers. I think Boone did this with Reapers earlier this year with Maugan Ra. But that's really advanced play. And I think For most Eldari players, it's the list of feasible, reasonable options is pretty short. If you're going to get one of these kits, I will say that you could, for $65, order the Falcon Wave Serpent kit and then purchase from the Magnet Baron, my sponsor, a full magnetization kit that allows it to be either the Wave Serpent or the Falcon and fully magnetizes all of the weapons. So if 11th edition comes out and star cannons are amazing, you swap those out. I would definitely have a look at, if you're going to do this, don't just order the kit, look at the instructions for it too and make sure it's not above your pay grade. But honestly, if you have the skills to assemble Citadel models, some of which have gotten Games Workshop models, some of which have gotten fairly complicated since I started playing, you should be able to handle the magnetization kit. And it also comes with an alternative, much sturdier, robust stand. But if you're really on a budget, just get the Wave Serpent and call it good for now. I think it's kind of a non-negotiable in an Eldar collection, but currently I don't think there's any detachment you might want to run that is simply not going to function without a Falcon. And that's what I've got. If you have your own ideas how to use the Eldari... Oh, last thing, guys, don't forget about Vehicle Shock. Vehicle Shock is really good. It's a 1-point stratagem tank shock. And in the charge phase, once you've dumped stuff out of your transport, you're not really using it anymore. If you need to go aggro with it, you move your 14 inches or in a war host list, you could move 20 plus 1 inches with vectored engines or star engines or whatever they are. And then you make a charge move and you roll d6 equal to the toughness character of the vehicle. So you roll 9 dice, and every 5 up will inflict a mortal wound. On average, it will do the same amount of damage as throwing a grenade. But in combination with the grenade stratagem and maybe your swooping hawks or something, you can actually spam a bunch of mortal wounds with this onto something. So when you're thinking about other things you can do with the transports after you're not using them for units anymore, don't forget about tank shock. That's my last thing. It's particularly satisfying into your opponent's like durable character with the -1 to wound and the 4-up invuln and the 2-up armor save, and you throw a grenade at it and you run it over with your Wave Serpent, and it's delightful. Okay, now I think I'm really done. If you have your own ideas about how to use the Eldari Transports effectively, please leave those in the comments below. If you wish to say hi and help the algorithm, it's always appreciated. And if you wish to talk more about Eldari tanks or other space elf stuff, you could become a patron. I will link it in the video description for $3 a month and join the Discord. Okay, that's what I've got this week. Bye. Back again soon with something new.